The alien survey ship drifted to a halt in the black void of space. Below them spun a shining blue world, its surface almost entirely covered by endless water that shimmered like a giant mirror under the light of its star. Every alien on the bridge fell silent, as if the very sight of that world had stolen their voices. The soft hum of the ship's engines was the only sound, and even that seemed too loud in the heavy stillness. The captain stood at the front, his eyes locked on the great ocean planet below. His scaled hands tightened around the railing, and he gave a quiet command that carried more fear than authority. "Shut down the scanners," he said. "Do not send any more signals to the surface. We do not stay near ocean worlds." No one on the crew questioned him, for they all knew the old stories. Stories passed down through generations of their people about deep waters that hid ancient, hungry things. Things that even the stars feared. Things that waited patiently in the blackest trenches where no light could reach. They were said to rise without warning, swallowing entire ships in a single moment. Some said these creatures were older than the planets themselves. Others claimed they were the last survivors of a time before the galaxies were formed. But no matter the version of the tale, every alien race agreed on one thing: stay away from water worlds or die. The crew obeyed in silence, and the ship began to turn away from the planet. They would leave without setting foot on its surface, without scanning its depths, without leaving a single trace that they had ever been there. The captain felt the tension in the air loosen as the ship pointed toward the stars, away from the glittering danger below. Far away across the cold darkness of space, another species heard of this same world. On Earth, humans listened to the alien signals that had drifted across the void, carrying fragments of warnings. Some were intercepted transmissions between alien ships. Some were half-broken stories captured from deep space beacons. They all spoke of one thing: a planet of endless oceans abandoned by every known race in the galaxy. To the aliens, it was a graveyard. To the humans, it was a challenge. Where others saw only death, they saw opportunity. It was not in human nature to turn away from the unknown, especially when that unknown dared to scare everyone else. Oceans did not frighten them. For on Earth, they had sailed across storms and dived into the darkest trenches of their own seas. They had fought the waves and claimed the coasts. They had learned that danger was simply another word for discovery. The story of the forbidden water world spread quickly among Earth's explorers. In small meeting rooms and vast orbital stations, they whispered about it with excitement. Some saw riches in its untouched resources. Others saw the chance to map and claim a world that no one else dared to touch. A few simply wanted to be the first to stand on its shores and leave their footprints where only alien fear had rested before. It was not long before a mission was formed. The crew chosen for it were not the most cautious, but the most daring. Men and women who had spent their lives braving storms, diving into the abyss, and walking where others would not. Their ship was not the largest, but it was built for resilience. It could withstand crushing pressure and violent waves. It carried submersibles, drones, and equipment for deep water exploration. And it carried a human spirit that no alien warning could dim. In the days before launch, some alien traders passing near Earth heard of what the humans planned and tried to warn them again. They spoke of the eyes that glowed in the deep of the abyss. They told of the screams that echoed through the water without air. They described ships pulled under so fast that not a bubble rose to the surface. But the humans only listened politely and smiled in that way that made the aliens uneasy. It was the same smile the humans wore before climbing mountains, before stepping on a frozen world, before leaping into the black between stars. The day of launch arrived. The human ship rose from the docks of an orbital platform, slowly at first, then faster, until it vanished into the night. Families watched from screens and observation decks, knowing they might never see these explorers again. Yet there was pride in their faces, for this was the nature of their kind: to go where others would not, to make a home where others saw only danger. The journey took weeks through silent stretches of space where no suns warmed their hull and no planets glimmered in the distance. The crew filled the hours with training equipment checks and quiet talks about what they might find. Some imagined alien ruins beneath the waves. Others dreamed of new life unlike anything on Earth. A few admitted to a shadow of fear when they thought of the black trenches spoken of in alien tales. But fear was not enough to stop them. If anything, it sharpened their determination. As the ship neared the ocean planet, its pale blue light filled the viewing windows. It was more beautiful than they had imagined. Clouds drifted across the surface, casting shifting shadows on the seas. Massive storms swirled like white spirals hundreds of miles wide. The crew could almost hear the distant roar of the waves through the silence of space. They entered orbit, and for a moment no one spoke. Each of them stared at the endless water and felt the pull of it. It was alive in a way no empty rock or frozen moon could ever be. It was moving, shifting, breathing. It was waiting. The captain of the human crew looked around at her people and gave a single nod. The time had come. They had not crossed half the galaxy to watch from above. Engines burned as the ship began its descent through the thin upper atmosphere. The blue surface grew larger, filling every window until it was all they could see. Winds battered the hull, and the ship shook as it cut through clouds heavy with rain. Flashes of lightning lit the sky, and thunder rolled like a distant drum. The crew strapped in, but their eyes never left the growing shape of the largest ocean on the planet. The alien stories had called it the Heart Sea. It was said to be the center of every strange and deadly thing that lived here. If that was true, then it was exactly where the humans intended to go. The ship broke through the final layer of cloud, and the Heart Sea stretched out before them. It was a vast, endless expanse of dark blue water, broken only by the curling white tops of waves. Rain hammered the hull, and wind howled, but the humans only leaned forward, their hearts beating faster. The alien forbidden world was no longer just a story. It was here in front of them, and they were heading straight for its heart. The waves rose high around the human ship, their peaks sharp and white against the deep blue of the ocean. Each crash sent shudders through the hull, but the vessel held steady, cutting through the swells with steady power. The wind roared in their ears, and the salt spray coated the windows, making the world beyond look like a shifting blur of water and light. It was a place that seemed alive and angry, as if it wanted to push them back into the sky from where they came. The crew moved with careful steps across the deck, securing equipment and checking the lines that held the smaller craft in place. They had come prepared for the storm, knowing that such waters would test them before allowing them to see what lay beneath. Every member of the crew felt the weight of the alien warnings, yet none let it show. Their eyes burned with the same fire that had carried them across space to this place. They were here to find the truth, and no amount of wind or water would send them away. The captain stood at the edge of the bridge, watching the waves through a reinforced window. She gave a sharp order to prepare the first dive. The submersible, a small craft built for pressure and darkness, was lowered into the churning water, its lights cutting narrow paths through the rain. Inside it, two divers secured their gear and gave each other a brief nod. The hatch closed, and the craft slipped into the restless ocean, leaving only ripples to mark its path. The descent began slowly, the sub rocking gently as it passed under the surface. Above them, the storm roared unseen, but here below the water was heavier and calmer, though shadows twisted around them like smoke in the dark. The lights reached only a short distance before being swallowed by the blue. It was a depth that seemed to pull at the mind, making it hard to tell how far or how fast they were falling. The sonar began to pick up movement. At first, it was only small flashes, maybe schools of fish darting away from the lights. Then a shape appeared on the edge of the screen. It was large, far larger than any sea creature the divers had known from Earth. It moved with slow power, circling them once then again, as if studying these strange new visitors. Its path was silent, yet the pressure of its presence could be felt even through the thick walls of the sub. The crew on the main ship watched the readings with tight jaws. Every pass brought the shape closer until the sonar painted it as a massive form almost as long as the submersible itself. The captain leaned forward, her voice steady but firm, telling the divers, to hold their course. Fear would not win this first meeting. The shadow grew, and the lights of the sub began to catch pieces of it. Smooth skin glistened in the beam's pale against the deep water. A single massive eye reflected the light back like a cold mirror. The creature rose slowly from the depths, its body breaking the beam entirely for a moment. Then with a sudden burst of movement, it surged upward. The divers braced, expecting impact, but instead the creature stopped only a few meters away, its great head tilting as if to see them more clearly. It was a standoff in the silent deep. Neither moved for what felt like endless moments. The divers could hear their own breathing loud inside their helmets. The creature's eye shifted, studying the sub and the lights. Then, without warning, it began to sink again, its huge tail sweeping a slow arc through the water. But it did not leave. It settled below them, moving in lazy circles, as if claiming them as part of its space. The divers exchanged a glance, both thinking the same thing. This was not an attack. It was curiosity. The captain on the main ship made a choice. She ordered the divers to exit the sub in their suits and meet the creature in the open water. It was dangerous, but it was the only way to understand what they were dealing with. The hatch opened, and the divers stepped out into the cold vastness. The weight of the ocean pressed on them from all sides, yet they moved forward toward the massive shape that hovered in the gloom. The creature remained still as they approached. Its eye followed their slow movements, and for a moment it seemed to lean closer. One diver raised a hand palm, open and steady. The other held the light steady on the great head. The creature did not retreat. Instead, it moved closer until the diver's hand touched its smooth skin. It was warm and firm, with a strange hum that seemed to come from within. The divers could feel the vibration through their gloves, like the steady beat of a heart larger than any machine. On the main ship, the crew watched in disbelief. The alien stories had spoken only of death in the water, yet here was a meeting without fear, without violence. The creature lowered its head further, allowing the divers to walk their hands along its surface. Then it moved again slowly, turning toward the darker depths, as if inviting them to follow. The captain gave the order to track it, but keep a safe distance. The divers re-entered the sub and sealed the hatch. Engines hummed softly as they began to follow the great shape into the deep, where the light could not reach. Every meter they descended, the water grew darker, heavier, and colder. The creature moved ahead with slow, easy strokes of its tail, never once looking back. The divers and the crew knew they were heading toward something no alien had ever dared to see. And in the growing darkness, the first glimmers of strange light began to appear far below. Asked ChatGPT. The water ahead shifted as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. From the darkness below, a vast shadow began to rise, slow, at first like a drifting mountain, then faster with a force that stirred the currents around the submersible. The lights caught only fragments, at first a glint of pale skin, the curve of something massive, the sudden reflection of an eye so large it seemed like a glowing moon in the deep. The divers inside the sub held their positions, their hands on the controls, but their movements frozen by the sight. The surface above bulged as the creature ascended, and then it broke through in a rush of foaming water. The ocean exploded around it, sending waves outward in every direction. Its head alone was the size of the sub, and its eyes burned with an ancient intelligence that seemed to pierce straight through metal, glass, and flesh. The stories told by alien captains in dark bars across the galaxy had never described this much detail, yet here it was alive and real and close enough to touch. On the main ship, high above, the storm raged, but every crew member crowded around the displays that showed the live feed from a sub. The sight of the creature silenced them all. This was what had driven other species to flee from such worlds. This was the reason alien captains had ordered entire fleets to change course at the mere detection of deep oceans. And now humans were not only here, but face to face with it. The captain's voice came through the calm and firm, telling the divers to keep steady. Fear was the one thing they could not afford right now. The creature's gaze shifted between them almost like it was studying every detail of their craft and movements. Then it lowered itself slowly back into the water until only its eyes remained above the surface. Rain struck the wave around it, but nothing dared disturb the space where it floated watching them. The captain gave the order for the divers to leave the safety of the sub once again. Every alien record would have screamed against such an action, but this was not the way humans worked. If they wanted to understand, they had to meet the unknown directly. The hatch opened, and the two divers swam out into the cold vastness, their suits heavy, but their movements sure. The ocean pressed against them from every side, its weight unending and its silence broken only by the rush of their own breathing. They swam closer to the creature which waited unmoving in the water. Its eye followed their every stroke, and the divers felt as though they were being measured in ways no machine could detect. When they were close enough, one diver extended a hand. The creature did not retreat. It shifted slightly, allowing the light from the diver's helmet to spill across its head, revealing skin that was smooth and pale, marked with strange flowing patterns that seemed almost alive. The diver's glove touched the surface, and a low vibration hummed through the water. It was not a growl, not a threat, but something deeper, a sound that resonated in the chest more than in the ears. The second diver placed a hand beside the first and felt the same deep thrum. For a moment, they all floated there together in the dark, bound by nothing but the press of the water and the silent exchange of presence. On the main ship, the crew stared in awe. This was no mindless predator from alien nightmares. It was something that chose to allow them near when it could have ended them in seconds. The creature shifted again and began to sink slowly, its body disappearing into the deep. The divers returned to the sub and sealed the hatch, engines humming as they followed. The descent felt longer now, the darkness around them heavier than before, yet ahead the creature moved with unhurried grace. Its tail swept the water in slow arcs, guiding them ever downward past jagged cliffs of stone and fields of drifting plants that waved like the banners of forgotten kingdoms. The sonar began to show shapes on the seafloor far below. Not the irregular forms of rocks, but structures straight and deliberate arches, pillars, and walls that stretched into the gloom. The captain leaned forward, eyes fixed on the displays. If the readings were right, they were looking at ruins. The crew whispered to one another, but none raised their voices enough to distract from the moment. The creature slowed its movements until it hovered above the ruins, then turned to face the sub. Its gaze flicked between the divers and the stone city below, as if offering a choice. Come closer or turn away. The captain's decision was instant. The sub descended into the ruins, passing between towering arches carved with flowing symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. The light from the craft caught murals etched into the walls, images of creatures like their guide, swimming beside, smaller figures, perhaps an ancient people who once lived here. The water was warmer now, and the current gentler, as if the ruins themselves were protected by some unseen force. The creature followed close behind, moving with the quiet patience of a guardian. Every shadow seemed to draw back in its presence. The divers recorded everything, their cameras, capturing every stone, every mark, every flicker of light. It was a treasure greater than any mineral or resource the aliens had imagined lay beneath the waves. It was a story, an entire forgotten chapter of galactic history hidden under miles of water. A sudden shift in the water drew their attention. From deeper in the ruins, a new glow began to grow, soft at first, then brighter, as a massive shape emerged from between two crumbling towers. It was another creature like the first, but older, its skin darker, its eyes dim yet steady. The guide moved to its side, and the two circled one another slowly in what seemed like a silent greeting. Then the older one turned its gaze toward the sub, its head dipping slightly before rising again. The divers did not know if it was a welcome or a warning. But the guide swam toward them, once more circling the sub, as if urging them to follow again. The captain gave the signal, and they descended further still. The ruins grew denser, the arches higher, the symbols brighter. It was as if they were entering the very heart of a city that had been sleeping for countless ages. Somewhere far below, a pulse of light traveled through the water, passing between the symbols and down into the deep. The creature followed the pulse, and the sub stayed close. They did not know what waited ahead, only that turning back was no longer an option. The darkness closed around them again, but the faint lights of the ancient city lit their path. And far in the distance, something vast moved, casting a shadow across the ruins that even the great creature beside them could not match. The water grew warmer as the submersible followed the giant creature deeper into the ruins. Stone arches rose from the seafloor, their shapes graceful and strange like the bones of some ancient titan long gone. The glowing symbols along their surfaces pulsed slowly, as if in rhythm, with a hidden heartbeat that belonged to the city itself. The light painted the water in soft shades of green and blue, and for the first time the divers felt as if they were inside something living rather than exploring a place long dead. The guide creature moved with unhurried power, weaving between crumbling towers and wide plazas where stone statues leaned half-buried in drifting sand. Each statue showed the same form, tall, slender beings with long, flowing shapes extending from their heads and shoulders as if made to swim through the water. Some held staffs carved with the same symbols on the arches. Others stood with hands raised toward the surface as though calling to the sky above. It was a vision of a people who had ruled the depths in an age no one remembered. The crew on the main ship could barely breathe as they watched the feed from the sub. Every frame showed wonders that defied alien fears and myths. They had expected only dark trenches and dangerous beasts, yet here was proof of a civilization forgotten by time and abandoned even by the creatures that now guarded it. The divers inside the sub leaned closer to the glass, taking in every detail. The carvings on the walls told stories and images. Some showed the great creatures swimming beside the ancient people as equals. Others showed storms raging on the surface, while the people built vast domes beneath the waves, safe from the fury above. One image showed something darker, a shadow, stretching from the depths toward the city, its shape unclear, but its size dwarfing everything else in the scene. The symbols around it glowed brighter as the sub passed, almost as if warning them of what lay further down. The guide creature slowed and turned toward a massive archway, half collapsed but still wide enough for the sub to pass. Beyond it, the ruins gave way to a vast open chasm that descended into darkness without end. The walls of the chasm were lined with more glowing symbols connected by threads of light that ran downward into the unseen depths. The pulse of light they had followed earlier was moving through these threads, carrying its glow far below. The captain spoke through the calmer voice, calm but low, telling the divers to keep their focus and follow the guide. The sub moved forward, crossing the threshold into the chasm. The water here was still warmer, yet heavier, pressing against the hull as though it carried some unseen weight. The lights from the sub reached only a short distance before being swallowed by the black, but the symbols along the walls kept them from being lost in total darkness. Far below, shapes moved slowly, too distant to identify, but large enough to stir the water in long, slow waves that rocked the sub. The divers checked their readings and found the depth was already beyond what most human subs had ever reached, yet the hull held steady and the system stayed green. It was as if the ruins themselves shielded them from the crushing pressure of the deep. The guide led them to a wide shelf carved into the side of the chasm. Here stood a massive doorway, flanked by two statues, each several times taller than the sub. These statues were different from the ones above. Their faces were hidden behind masks shaped like the heads of the great creatures, and their hands rested on long spears pointed toward the ground. The glowing symbols on the doorway formed a pattern unlike any they had seen, so far intricate and shifting as if alive. The guide hovered beside the doorway and let out a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the water and into the hull. The symbols responded, pulsing in time with the sound. Then slowly the doorway began to open. The stone parted without stirring the water, and beyond was a chamber lit by a soft golden glow. The sub entered, and the divers felt the temperature change again, this time to a comfortable warmth that wrapped around them like the shallow waters of a summer coast. The chamber walls were covered in mosaics made of small pieces of glowing stone. They formed a single, unbroken image that spiraled around the room, telling the history of this place. At the top, the ancient people were shown arriving in the deep, carried on vessels shaped like the great creatures. They built their city stone by stone, always beside their guardians. In the middle of the spiral, the shadow from the earlier carvings appeared again, larger this time, and reaching into the city itself. The people stood together with the creatures forming a barrier that pushed the shadow back into the deep. The lower part of the spiral showed fewer people, but more creatures, as if over time the two had become one. In the center of the room stood a raised platform, and on it rested a sphere of light no larger than a human head. It floated above the stone base, turning slowly and casting shifting patterns on the walls. The guide moved closer to it, and then turned to face the sub, its great eye fixed on the divers. The captain gave a slow order to bring the sub closer. The divers could feel their pulse quicken as they approached the sphere. It was beautiful yet unsettling. The light seemed to move inside it like liquid fire, and when they looked too long, they felt as if they were being drawn into its depths. The guide lowered its head toward the sphere and released another deep sound. In answer, the sphere brightened, and the patterns on the walls began to move, showing the ancient battle with the shadow in vivid motion. The people and the creatures fought together, their movements swift and precise. The shadow twisted and lashed, but could not pass the barrier. In the final image, the sphere itself was placed in the center of the city, and the shadow retreated into the chasm where no light could reach. The patterns faded, and the sphere dimmed, returning to its slow rotation. The guide turned again to the sub, and for a moment everything was still. Then the creature began to swim toward another passage on the far side of the chamber. It was smaller than the chasm, but still large enough for them to follow. The walls here were smooth and unmarked, as if carved not for beauty, but for function. The water grew cooler and darker as they moved through. A faint sound reached them ahead, not the hum of machines, nor the shift of water, but something like a slow, steady heartbeat. It grew louder as they went until the passage opened into another vast space far larger than the first. Here the water was filled with drifting motes of light, like stars caught in slow motion. And at the very center, far below, something immense moved, casting shadows that covered the walls entirely. The divers could not see its shape, only the way the light bent around it, and the way the heartbeat seemed to come from its core. The guide stopped and hovered, watching them, as if asking without words whether they would dare to continue. Asked ChatGPT. The shadow at the center of the great chamber moved with slow power, as if every motion carried the weight of ages. The drifting motes of light swirled around it, drawn in by some unseen current before drifting away again. The divers inside the sub felt the water press heavier on them, as if the presence of this thing reached through the ocean and touched every drop around it. The heartbeat sound echoed steady and deep, vibrating through the walls and into their bones. It was not the fast beat of fear or the sharp pulse of attack, but the slow, steady rhythm of something that had been alive for far longer than any human civilization. The guide creature hovered beside them, watching the massive shape, as if waiting for it to acknowledge their arrival. The lights from the sub reached out in thin beams, but they barely touched the edges of the shadow. It was too large, too deep in the water, for any simple light to reveal its true form. Yet the divers could feel it studying them in return. There was no rush in its movements, no sign of threat, only an ancient patience that seemed to stretch beyond time. The captain's voice came through the calm quiet, but steady, telling the divers to hold their position and record everything. She knew they were witnessing something that no alien had dared to look upon, and that many believed did not even exist. The crew on the main ship listened in silence, their eyes locked on the feed, each one aware they were part of a moment that would change the way the galaxy saw this world. The guide released a low sound that rolled through the water like a slow wave. The shadow responded with a pulse of light from deep within its body. The motes in the water brightened as the pulse passed through them, and for a moment the divers could see the faint outline of the massive figure. It was shaped like the guide, but even larger, its body lined with glowing markings that shifted like living patterns across its skin. Its eyes opened wide enough to fill the divers' viewports, each one holding a calm light that seemed to pierce straight into their thoughts. The older creature began to move, circling slowly until it faced the sub directly. The guide swam to its side, and the two exchanged another slow pulse of sound and light. It was a conversation without words, but the meaning felt heavy, as if decisions were being made far beyond human understanding. Then the older creature began to rise, and the guide motioned for the sub to follow. They ascended through the chamber, the motes of light spinning lazily in the disturbed water. The heartbeat grew fainter as they rose, but the weight of the encounter stayed with the divers. The passage ahead opened into another part of the ruins, and here the architecture was different. The stone was smoother, and the carvings more intricate, each wall telling pieces of a story that seemed to continue from the mosaics they had seen before. The divers saw images of the great creatures swimming in long lines beside the ancient people, carrying them through the water in moments of peace and in times of war. They saw the shadow again, always kept at bay by the light of the sphere. Then the people began to disappear from the carvings, replaced entirely by the creatures themselves. The final images showed the creatures alone, swimming across empty oceans, their heads raised toward the surface, as if waiting for something that never came. The guide led them to a wide plaza where the ruins opened into a vast open space under the water. Here the sunlight from above filtered faintly through the storms, casting pale shafts that reached the seafloor like long fingers of silver. Schools of small fish darted through the beams, their movements quick and bright. The plaza itself was ringed by tall pillars, each one carved with a unique symbol glowing softly in the dim light. At the center of the plaza stood a massive statue of one of the creatures, its head lowered, and its fins spread wide, as if in welcome. In front of the statue rested another sphere smaller than the first, and this one cracked with lines of light spilling from within. The guide swam toward it and paused, its great eye fixed on the divers, as if granting permission for them to approach. The captain ordered the sub closer, and the divers leaned forward, studying the sphere. The light inside it moved in slow spirals like the turning of a galaxy. The cracks glowed brighter the nearer they came, and the water around it seemed to hum faintly. One of the divers reached out with a gloved hand, and as soon as they touched the surface, the light surged outward, flooding the plaza in brilliance. The pillars flared to life, their symbols glowing as bright as the sun. The beams of light from above thickened, as if the clouds themselves had been pushed back. And in the center of the sphere, an image formed. It was not a carving or a projection, but a vision that filled their minds with sound and motion. They saw the city alive, its streets filled with the ancient people and the great creatures moving side by side. They heard the sounds of music and rushing water, and the voices of thousands speaking in harmony. Then they saw the shadow rise from the abyss, vast and terrible. The battle that followed was unlike anything the divers had imagined. The people and creatures fought together, their movements perfectly timed, but still the shadow pushed forward. It was the sphere that turned the tide, its light burning brighter until it forced the darkness back. The vision shifted, showing the aftermath. The people stood weary and wounded, knowing the shadow was not gone, only sleeping. They entrusted the spheres to the creatures, charging them to guard the oceans until the day new allies arrived to stand with them. The vision faded, and the light of the sphere dimmed to a steady glow once more. The guide moved closer to the divers, lowering its head until its eye was level with theirs. It released a low sound, softer than before, almost gentle. The captain spoke quietly into the calm, saying she believed the creature was offering them the same trust given to it long ago. She gave the order to accept whatever came next. The guide turned toward a new path, leading away from the plaza toward a darker region of the ruins. The divers guided the sub after it, passing through arches draped with long strands of glowing plants that waved gently in the current. The water cooled again, and the light from above faded until only the glow of the plants and the faint reflection from the sub remained. Ahead, the ruins ended in a sheer drop, where the seafloor vanished into a vast trench. From within that trench came a dim but steady light pulsing in slow rhythm. The guide hovered at the edge and looked back at the divers, its gaze steady, as if to ask if they would go further. The trench yawned below them, vast and silent. Somewhere deep within lay the source of the light, and perhaps the truth behind every alien fear of this world. The divers knew that to turn away now would mean leaving the greatest secret of the ocean undiscovered. And so, without a word, the sub tilted forward and began to descend into the waiting dark. The trench seemed endless as the sub sank deeper into the dark, with only the slow pulsing light far below to guide them. The water grew colder and the pressure built around them, but the sub was strong and steady, holding its course without a tremor. The guide swam ahead, its body glowing faintly in the blackness, as if it carried its own private piece of the sun. The divers inside the sub kept their eyes on the sensors, watching strange readings appear and vanish, as if the water itself held shifting currents of energy. The heartbeat sound from earlier returned, deeper, slower, yet more powerful, carrying through the hull like a distant drum. The descent was silent, except for the hum of the engines and the steady breathing of the crew. The captain watched every movement on the displays, her mind focused on both the unknown ahead and the safety of her people. She had led missions into war zones and storms across alien skies, but nothing in her experience matched the weight of this place. It felt less like they were exploring and more like they were being drawn towards something that had been expecting them for a very long time. As they reached the bottom of the trench, the faint light resolved into a vast chasm floor covered in smooth black stone. In the center lay a structure unlike the ruins above. It was not carved or built in pieces, but seemed to have been formed from a single massive shape. Its surface shimmered as if wet, but no current touched it, and from its heart came the pulsing glow that filled the trench. The guide swam directly to the structure and hovered before it. The divers brought the sub closer, moving slowly over the stone floor. Strange patterns were etched into the surface of the structure, forming long flowing lines that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. The light from within the structure passed along these lines in steady waves, and the divers realized they were looking at a map. Not a map of this world, but of many worlds spread across the galaxy. The captain ordered the cameras to focus on the patterns, recording every detail. The guide released a long, low sound, and the glow within the structure brightened in response. A seam appeared along its surface, and slowly a section of it opened, revealing a hollow chamber filled with water that shimmered with soft light. The guide swam inside without hesitation, turning once to look at the sub, as if inviting them to follow. The captain gave the order to proceed, and the sub moved forward, entering the chamber. The moment they crossed the threshold, the light around them changed. It became warmer and more golden, carrying a strange feeling of safety that wrapped around them like a tide. The patterns along the walls pulsed faster, and the crew felt a gentle pressure in their minds, like a distant voice trying to speak without words. The divers exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them wanted to turn back. As they moved deeper, they saw that the inner walls of the structure were covered in vast murals, not etched in stone, but formed from living light that moved and shifted. The murals showed the same great creatures they had seen in the ruins, but now alongside other beings tall and strange, each from different worlds, yet united together. In every image, they faced the same enemy, the shadow from the depth, sometimes as a massive shape, sometimes as countless smaller forms that swarmed like a living storm. The murals told a long story of battles fought across oceans, deserts, skies, and even in the void between stars. They showed victories and losses, and in each case the light of a sphere stood at the heart of the struggle. The final image was not a battle, but a gathering of the great creatures encircling a sphere larger than any they had seen before. The light from this sphere reached out across the galaxy, touching world after world, as if sending a call that would one day be answered. The captain felt her pulse quicken as she understood the meaning. The call had been sent long ago, and perhaps the arrival of humans was part of the answer. The guide swam to the far side of the chamber where another seam opened, revealing a deep tunnel that sloped downward. The pulsing light flowed into it, and the heartbeat sound grew louder than ever. Without a word, the captain ordered the sub to follow. The tunnel twisted and turned, its walls narrowing and then opening into vast spaces lit by glowing veins of crystal. Strange creatures drifted in these spaces, some no larger than a hand, others the size of the sub itself, but none showed aggression. They moved aside as the guide passed, as if they recognized its authority. The deeper they went, the more the crew felt the presence of something immense waiting ahead. Finally, the tunnel opened into a chamber so large the walls vanished into the dark. At the center floated the source of the heartbeat and the pulsing light. It was a sphere larger than the sub itself, made of the same shimmering material as the smaller ones, but so bright it was hard to look at directly. The water around it was alive with motes of light, moving in patterns that seemed to match the rhythm of the heartbeat. The guide circled the sphere, releasing a series of low sounds that echoed through the chamber. The sphere responded with flashes of light, each one sending a wave of warmth through the water. The captain realized they were watching a conversation between two beings, one ancient beyond measure and the other almost as old. Then the sphere's light shifted toward the sub, and for the first time the crew felt it acknowledge them directly. The warmth in the water deepened, and the gentle pressure in their minds became a clear presence. Images formed not in their eyes, but in their thoughts. They saw the shadow rising again, this time stronger than before, its tendrils reaching not just across oceans, but into the skies and through the void. They saw worlds falling one by one as light was swallowed by the dark. And then they saw themselves. Humans standing alongside the great creatures, and others from far worlds fighting back against the shadow with the light of the spheres at their side. The vision faded, and the captain felt a single thought remain. The time was coming soon, and they would be needed. The guide moved closer to the sub, its great eyes steady and calm. It turned toward the exit of the chamber and began to swim upward, its path clear, as if the next step had already been decided. The captain gave the order to follow, knowing their journey was far from over. The sphere's glow faded slowly behind them, but its heartbeat remained in their minds. They rose through the tunnels, passing once more through the glowing crystal spaces and the drifting creatures. Each turn brought them closer to the surface, but also closer to the moment when they would have to decide how much of what they had seen to share with the galaxy. As they neared the end of the tunnel, the guide slowed, allowing the sub to rise ahead of it. The light from the upper waters filtered down soft and pale after so much time in the dark. The captain looked out at the beams of sunlight and felt the weight of the mission settle deeper on her shoulders. Above them, the storms still raged over the endless ocean, but now they knew what slept beneath those waves and what would one day awaken. They broke free into open water, and the surface waited above like a silver mirror rippling under the rain. The guide rose alongside them, its body a bright shape against the deep blue. Together they ascended toward the light, carrying with them the memory of the sphere and the promise it had given. The light from the sphere spread into the water around the humans and sank into their skin like warm sunlight beneath the waves, and they felt their lungs open in a strange way, and they could breathe without masks or tanks, and their bodies felt lighter and stronger, and the weight of the ocean no longer pressed on them, and the great guardian creatures swam in slow circles as if they were watching a moment that had not happened for ages. The aliens in their ships far above watched in confusion as the human divers removed their helmets and swam deeper with no sign of fear, and their voices carried through the water like clear bells, and they laughed in a way no other species would in the crushing dark depths, and the guardians followed them, guiding them toward the glowing city gates that had once been sealed to all outsiders. The Ocean Keeper moved beside them with slow, powerful strokes, and its armor reflected the lights of the deep city, and it spoke in a voice that rolled like thunder through the water, saying that the ocean would now know the humans as children of the tide, and that no current would turn against them, and no predator would strike without cause, and that the ocean itself would guide them when storms came and shadows stirred in the abyss. The humans entered the city and saw towers grown from coral and shells larger than mountains, and domes lit from within by slow pulsing light that looked like breathing, and schools of silver fish moved between the buildings like drifting stars. And in the central square, a great stone table stood carved with images of waves and creatures and storms, and beneath it was a deep trench that glowed faintly like an open eye watching from below. The Ocean Keeper told them that the trench was the heart of the ocean and that it connected to other worlds through hidden gates beneath the water, and that once the ocean had been the path between stars for a people who had vanished before the first alien empires were born, and that now the humans would learn the way of the tide so that they could travel where others could not and live where others would not dare. Far above, the alien fleets argued over what they were seeing, and some wanted to leave at once, saying that any world where humans could thrive in such deadly waters was cursed, and others wanted to study from a distance. But none dared land for fear of what waited in the depths, and the humans below swam freely and began building small homes along the edge of the great coral walls using strange materials that the ocean provided willingly. Days passed, and the humans adapted in ways that shocked even themselves, and they could swim for hours without tiring, and they could see in the dark as if it were daylight, and they could hear the distant calls of whales and guardians from miles away, and the ocean began to treat them as its own children, sending currents to bring food and shelter and carrying away dangers before they could reach the growing settlement. The Ocean Keeper watched silently as the humans learned to live not above the water, but within it, and it saw them plant gardens of coral and raise domes of shell and light that glowed softly at night, and the guardians swam through the streets like watchful giants, and the city felt alive again, as it had long ago when its first builders walked its streets and sang its songs to the deep. The humans began to send small teams into the trench with the guidance of the Keeper, and they found gateways that led to other oceans on distant worlds, each with its own strange life and challenges, and they marked these places for the future, knowing that one day more humans would come and fill the empty seas that the aliens feared, and the thought of it made them smile in a way only humans could when standing at the edge of the unknown. Above the planet, the alien fleets slowly drifted away, not wanting to witness more of this strange union between humans and the ocean, and they whispered through their networks that a new terror had been born in the galaxy, not of weapons or warships, but of a people who could turn death worlds into homes, and who could claim the very places that had driven others to flee, and they decided that it was wiser to avoid the blue world entirely. The humans paid no mind to the fear they caused in distant minds, for they were too busy building and exploring and teaching their children to swim with the guardians and to listen to the voice of the tide and to understand the stories carved into the coral walls that spoke of storms that shook stars and waves that swallowed cities, and of the few who learned to ride the waves instead of fighting them. As years passed, the ocean cities grew, and the gates in the trenches became roads between worlds, and more humans arrived to join the life in the deep, and each arrival was met by the guardians who swam alongside them like old friends, and the Ocean Keeper, who welcomed them with the words given to the first group that had dared dive into the forbidden waters: "You are not afraid, and that is rare." From the highest towers of coral, one could look out across the endless water and see the shimmer of the sun above and the shadow of the guardians below, and hear the heartbeat of the ocean in every current and in every wave, and the humans knew they had not just found a home, they had become part of something far older and greater than themselves, and they would guard it as fiercely as it guarded them. And so the world that the aliens had feared and abandoned became the heart of a new human age, and the blue seas that had been called death were now full of life and laughter and light. And in the dark reaches of space, the name of the water world carried a warning wrapped in wonder. If humans live there, then perhaps death lives there too, and perhaps death is on their side.